Welcome on in, my Lynn N Things family and friends, all of my subbies, new or old. Thank you so much for stopping by. It's Saturday evening, and we all know what time that is, right? It is story time with Lynn, and we will be picking up on our next chapter, reading the Cicely Tyson story, Just As I Am. Y'all, we have really been diving into this book. This book has just been so amazing, chapter by chapter. It really is a page turner, and I just want to say thank you to all of you who come back every Saturday to hear the next installment of in the next chapter of this awesome woman's story. It is just mind-blowing, and I have started reading Viola's. Oh my gosh, y'all, oh my goodness, two wonderful ladies to read up on. But y'all know we have to set the ambiance, and so we always start off with lighting our candles. So my candle of the evening, because we are in the fall, and so I kind of wanted a fall scent, and so this is my Autumn Leaves Ray Dunn family candle. So we're gonna light our autumn leaves right quick, and even along with that, honey, y'all, I done made me a autumn drink. I have made myself a pumpkin chai latte tea in my, of course, using my breast cancer awareness cups, because it is October and we know it is breast cancer awareness month, and y'all know I love pink as well. So yes, let me get a little sip of that. And I did use real pumpkin, some pumpkin I found at the DT. Oh my goodness, this thing is amazing. So I have my little drink ready. I have my candle lit. And we're going to jump into, I believe we're on chapter 14. So thank you guys again so much for coming through each and every chapter, guys. I hope you have been enjoying it. And as always, please feel free to write down your thoughts in the comment section. What jumped out at you? Is there something that took you back to a certain memory? All of your comments are welcome. Okay, guys, so we're going to jump into chapter 14, and the title of chapter 14 is Rebecca. Okay, guys, so it says, my work on Sounder began with a prediction. In the spring of 1971, I was set to fly out to Los Angeles to start work on the film. And as was true with every important moment in my life, I wanted to share this one with Arthur. He'd been overseas on tour with his students, and we hadn't yet connected about my role. So on my way to the airport, I stopped by his place to give him my good news in person. I'm going out to Hollywood to do my first big movie, I said, joy lifting my cheeks. And if you do, Arthur said, you're going to be nominated for an Oscar. And if I am, I told him, you will be my escort. We hugged and I went on my way. Even before filming began, skepticism abounded over whether Sounder would resonate. The short 3-year gap between Dr. King's assassination in 1968 and our first day on set in 1971 felt more like a decade. Throughout the 60s, there had been a major political shift among young blacks in particular, some of whom were weary with King's passive resistance and favored forceful rebellion. The change became more pronounced after we lost King, and movies began mirroring the evolving times. Theatergoers longed for brazen black characters, heroes willing to take up arms in battling racial violence, in place of conciliatory Negroes serving as white America's moral conscience. This new spirit was, in part, what gave rise to blaxploitation cinema, the genre that, as I see it, did more to impede our progress than to fuel it. In such an environment, director Marty Ritt made the brave choice to feature a loving black family in a plot that neither satisfied the thirst for black rebel characters nor reinforced the stereotype of us as heathenish villains. It was bold. It raised eyebrows and doubts. And even Paul Winfield and I, the principal actors, wondered whether anyone would show up to see the film. At the start of the project, I stopped first in LA to meet with the crew about costuming and hair, and then I flew on to Baton Rouge, Louisiana for filming. By the time I stepped on set, Rebecca had already taken me over. I'd of course pored over the script and started in with my usual inquisition. Why did the writer create the character? Why was she given the name Rebecca? How does her dialogue reinforce her characterization? Rebecca's purpose, in a word, was support. She was the rock sustaining those children while her husband was in jail for the crime of ensuring his families could eat. I took all of that in as I read, and once I allowed Rebecca's essence to dislodge my own, she began manifesting in my gestures. One morning, when I was cleaning, I began doing everything with my left hand. What the devil is wrong with me, I thought. Rebecca must be left-handed. Sure enough, one afternoon between takes on set, Kevin Hooks, who portrayed my eldest son, said, "Mama, let's play ball." He picked up the ball with his left hand and threw it. "Kevin, are you left-handed?" I asked. He nodded. It stood to reason that Rebecca's firstborn, like his mother, would be a lefty. So I played Rebecca completely from my left side. I also got Rebecca's hair right, just as I had done in East Side and every other film I've been in. I felt determined to bring authenticity to my character. During the 1930s in the South, poor black women typically cornrowed their hair, as well as wrapped their heads while laboring in fields and kitchens. I called on Omar, the stylist that I had been working with in California, and I asked her to cornrow my hair. She knew how to braid, but because she wasn't a union worker, she couldn't do the job. So I began calling around to see whether I could find someone in my network. Through a friend, I connected with a woman who was married to an African. And when she and her husband had lived on the continent, the women there taught her how to cornrow. She wasn't a union worker either, but somehow we were able to bring her in. She's the one who gently parted and braided my hair into perfectly spaced rolls. Filming went on for several weeks, and one scene in particular will always be memorable. Near the end of the film, after Jim Crow's injustices have separated Nathan and Rebecca for months, the two run toward each other along a long dirt road and embrace. Everywhere I go, folks ask me about that scene. After we had filmed the tearful reunion, Marty Ritt, compassionate soul he was, came over and put his arm around my shoulder. "Sis," he said, "I think we're going to have to do that again." I stared at him blankly, knowing that I had emptied myself fully into that previous take. "Why?" I asked him. He nodded toward the cinematographer, John Alonzo. "When you were running to meet Nathan," Marty said, John's eyes filled with tears, "and he isn't sure that he got the shot." Oh boy. I told him, "I don't think I can do that again, Marty." When the film had landed in theaters on September 24th, 1972, the outlook seemed bleak. Paul and I were together that day, walking up Broadway. We looked out into the theater we passed, and there wasn't a soul at the box office, not even a person in line to buy tickets. We didn't say a word to one another. We just kept on walking in silence. I don't care how many shows an actor has played in, a single question hangs on every opening day. Will this time be good enough? I went home and cried privately over the disappointment, as I'm sure Paul did. But those tears dried up soon after when the reviews came in. Some praised Sounder as a courageous counter to the new wave of blaxploitation characters, noting how the film portrayed an affectionate and devoted black couple rarely witnessed on screen. Others mentioned how it put the Depression-era struggles of black folks into historical context, all while Nathan and Rebecca put our humanity on full display. Nobody, not even me, expected Sounder to receive such strong reviews. The phenomenal critical reception lit a match under the executives at 20th Century Fox. They realized what they had and launched a media blitzer. pouring more than $1 million into a massive promotional campaign. They quoted every positive word in every review and organized hundreds of screenings all over the country. Religious and civic organizations endorsed the film, and a study guide was even created. The movie went from struggling at opening weekend to becoming a major box office success. The day I learned I had been nominated for an Oscar, I was filming a small role for a new black director. Just as I was delivering an important line, I heard laughter on the sidelines of the set. "Don't they know we're shooting in here?" I snapped. "What's the matter with them?" A moment later, a producer walked in. "We've just gotten some good news," he said. I held up my hand. "I don't want to hear anything," I told him. "Whatever it is, it can wait. While I'm working, I show up to do exactly that. All else is a distraction, a disruption to an unfolding moment." The gentleman smiled and shook his head, and he left. The director, who must have heard the news that awaited, gave me a strange look before we resumed. We completed the scene, and even on my way out, I wouldn't let anyone tell me anything. It was upon arriving home at Haber's place that my agent gave me the exhilarating announcement. I had been nominated for an Academy Award for Best Actress. "Really?" I said, the living room suddenly swirling out of focus. "Yes," he yelped as tears flooded my face. All I could think about were Arthur's words to me. "You're going to be nominated for an Oscar." My friend's "what if" had come true. When I called him later that evening, he squealed like a baby boy, as if he'd been the one to receive the nomination. What a jewel that man was. His reaction was no less exuberant when later on I told him I had also been nominated for a Golden Globe. I don't care what any actor says, that golden statue matters. It is what we're all vying for, the ultimate validation from our peers. You empty yourself into a character. You labor hour upon hour to get every single gesture and sentence precise, and you mean to tell me that such an affirmation means nothing? To you, it holds tremendous power. When I was just getting into the business, I looked on in awe as Sidney Poitier earned that affirmation for his marvelous work in Lilies of the Field, becoming the first black man to win an Academy Award for Best Actor. That evening, as I watched the ceremony on my own old black and white RCA set, I said to myself, I'm going to sit in the front at the Oscars one day. That was my dream. But as my career carried me mostly toward stage and television, that hope seemed unlikely. That is why long before I did Sounder, I quietly accepted that the Academy Awards would probably not be part of my path. And yet, lo and behold, here I was, on the verge of taking a seat in that front row that I had envisioned for myself. I flew my mother to Los Angeles to attend the screening of Sounder. We were seated in the mezzanine, and she was one row behind me. In the dark, just as the curtains parted, she tapped me on the shoulder. "Ed Sullivan is sitting right behind me," she said, pronouncing his last name Sullivan. Because of whatever reason, West Indians can't say V's. For years, she never missed the Ed Sullivan Show on Sunday nights. I turned around and whispered to her, "And I'm sitting here," and we both kind of snickered. She loudly enough to prompt Ed Sullivan a smile in my mother's direction. To celebrate Sounder's cascade of nominations, the studio hosted a splashy New York premiere. I called upon acclaimed fashion designer Bill Whitten to design my dress. Years later, Bill would design Michael Jackson's rhinestone glove to cover the singer's early signs of vitiligo. "I want to create the kind of gown that Rebecca might have worn if she had money," I told Bill. That sent him in search of the prints and cottons poor colored women would have worn back in 1933. Using the fabric remnants he found, he pieced together a treasure. The dress, antebellum in style, came with a fancy apron that served as a flour sack. He filled it with cotton balls, he'd sent from down south. It was the most glorious creation. The same woman who braided my hair for the movie created a crown of beautiful cornrows to complement my look. When I strolled in that theater that evening, chin lifted, pride on my brow, I showed up in the name of the ancestors whose sweat and sorrow had carried me there. A month before the ceremony, the studio sent me overseas on a promotional tour in Europe. My first time in Paris and London. Months before I had left town, I rubbed elbows with British royalty. Anthony Charles Robert Armstrong Jones, first Earl of Snowdon, was then husband to Princess Margaret and an avid photographer and filmmaker. Lord Snowdon had taken quite an interest in Arthur's work at Dance Theatre of Harlem. The two began a partnership, with Lord Snowdon investing in the school. Arthur connected me with him, and during one of Lord Snowdon's trips to New York, he and I met for appetizers and a brief conversation. As we waited our order, he kept glancing over his shoulder. How strange, I thought. I wonder if he's expecting someone. As it turned out, he was on the lookout for the paparazzi, who of course had followed him to the restaurant. Later on, one of his trips to New York, Lord Snowdon photographed me wearing that Bill Whitton masterpiece of a dress. What a memory. In London, the marveling began with my ride from Heathrow in an enormous black taxi, a hackney carriage so gargantuan that I could stand up inside of it. In a penthouse suite in the Dorchester Hotel, I spent half an hour just wandering around the space, gawking at the grandeur and the accommodations, thinking back on those days when I, Emily, and Melrose had all been squished together on a rollaway bed in our parents' living room. And to think I now had this sprawling space to myself, in a world where my name was plastered on billboards all over America and Europe. It was nothing short of spectacular. The same was true of my time in the City of Light, where from the balcony I gazed in awe of the Eiffel Tower, head held high and preening in the distance. Back in New York, before the ceremony, the surrealism continued. In another head nod to Rebecca, I wanted my hair done in a chignon, the deep wave style that would have been popular for well-to-do women in the 1930s. Do you know how to do that style? I asked Omar. No, she said, but my mother can. Can you believe that child's mom came out of retirement just to create my waves? The words thank you fell short of expressing the gratitude that I felt. Designer Bill Whitton turned up at the luxury by creating a white silk wool-fitted dress with a touch of gray in it, complete with a heart cut out lace trim detail across the décolletage. Gracing each sleeve was a glistening row of tiny gold buttons, with the same buttons stretching down the back. It was absolutely stunning. When Arthur arrived, dashing in his tuxedo, he escorted me by the arm to the awaiting limo. The evening for us marked two celebrations, the 45th Academy Awards and my dear Arthur friend's 39th birthday. Soon after the Oscars, Miles reappeared in my world. His marriage with Betty had lasted just 1 year, and when it was done in 1969, word of their split, of course, found its way to my ears. He apparently slipped back into a heavy drug use after the divorce. Miles began reaching out to me, leaving messages on my answering machine at all hours of the day and night. I can't live like this anymore, sis, he said pleadingly in one message. I'm done with the dope. I had seen Miles a few times after he and Betty had divorced. He still lived around the corner from my place on the Upper West Side, and occasionally when I was in town, my sixth sense would send me over to his brownstone to check on him. You may dim love's light. But when you've cared for someone, you never fully switch off the affection. In spite of the emotional lacerations that I had endured at Miles's hand, some part of me still felt concern for him as a human being. It broke my heart that he was back in cocaine's grip. One morning, my spirit told me, go look in on him, and what I found still horrifies me. Particularly when Miles was using heavily, he left his front door unlocked. So when I walked up and found it standing fully ajar, I knew there was trouble. There in the sitting room on the main floor, Miles and a young woman lay passed out, the room reeking of a foul odor, rivaling any that I had ever smelled. I don't know how long they had been laying there, but judging by the vomit dried onto their cheeks and foreheads, it had to have been hours. I reached down over Miles and tapped him on the shoulder. His eyelids flew open. "Cicely?" he sputtered, forcing drool down his chin. I just stared at him. He lifted his head and gazed around, first at the woman and then back at me. He did not get up from the floor, which is where I left him wallowing in his own puke. I walked back to my apartment. I called Harold Melvin, the cousin of Miles's longtime housekeeper. "Where's Berlina?" I asked, after briefly apprising him of the situation. Harold immediately sent his cousin over to clean up the mess. "You always know right when to come, don't you?" Miles said to me a few days later. It was just that binding tie that we had, an otherworldly connection. I always get this gnawing feeling in my gut when Miles was in deep trouble. For the most part, however, I gave Miles a wide berth, having no desire to get caught back up in his toxicity. Maintaining my distance wasn't too difficult, given that I was in Los Angeles far more than I was in New York during those years. Out at Haber's place, I became the new darling in town, waltzing out on dates with this man and the next, showing up fashionably late to ensure I'd never be the one left waiting. For a brief time during my work on Sounder, Paul Winfield and I had courted. On-screen romances have a way of kind of spilling over into real life. You get swept up in your characters and co-stars' persona, which was particularly easy to do with the characters likable as Nathan and Rebecca. During our weeks of filming, Paul and I spent long hours shooting scenes passionate enough to melt even the most frigid heart. Our on-set relationship eventually grew into a personal one. Our affinity for one another is perhaps one reason Paul gave me his spot as Sounder's headliner. The other reason was that I had earned it. Paul, unlike his character, was quite shy. So although I could sense his interest when we'd first met during auditions in California, it took him a while to ask me out. He dredged up the courage midway through filming. During a weekend break from the set, we visited a Baton Rouge restaurant that we'd heard had the best gumbo in Louisiana. It didn't. Still, over steaming okra and bouillon, we traded laughs and easy conversation. And from there, our connection slid into an easy sway. Paul was a kind soul, as gentle as the century is long. During quiet evenings indoors, he loved making me spaghetti, doused in his special sauce. Our relationship lasted a year, give or take. A work prospect cut it short. Berry Gordy Jr., founder of Motown Records, had plans to continue developing his new film and television division following the success of A Lady Sings the Blues. He approached Paul about lending his talents to the division. According to Paul, Gordy also wanted me to get involved, though he never asked me personally. Wouldn't it have been wonderful to have a steady income, to not have to struggle to pay rent? Paul asked me. In principle, I agreed, but in fact, my spirit, which has never steered me wrong, nudged me to kind of decline. Although no one can argue Gordy's genius as a record executive, his label, the highest earning African American label for decades, launched the careers of the Supremes, Marvin Gaye, and Stevie Wonder, among scores of other greats. I'd heard there was some drama behind the scenes, I didn't know what was true and what wasn't. But I did have the sense to follow my instinct, which I voiced to Paul. But you should still pursue it if you really want to, I told him. He did it for a time, though I don't think much ever came of the collaboration. Yet it was at that juncture that Paul and I naturally moved in different directions. And as we did, neither of us attempted to reverse course. In my case, because our connection, while tender, lacked the intensity that I had shared with Miles. When I opened the door, Miles stumbled toward me, absolutely stoned out of his mind. He was so high he could barely stay on his feet. He reached for me, and with my heart thundering in my chest, I closed the door halfway. "Please, sis, let me in," he begged. I widened the door slightly, and in he fell, down onto his knees in front of me. With his shirt halfway unbuttoned, saliva dripping from the corners of his mouth, I closed the door behind me and stood him up, led him to the edge of the bed, and lowered him onto it. He sat there for a moment before he tried to get up again, but he fell to his knees once more. He then crawled over to a large window overlooking Fifth Avenue, which was dotted with high-rises, and he pointed out to them. Cicely, he stammered, "you see all those apartments?" I stared at him and did not answer. "Every person in those buildings knows who you are," he slurred. He began to cry. "Tell them I'm your boyfriend," he went on. "I'll take you any place you want to go. Just tell them I'm with you." And I stood there dazed, saddened to my core at the state he was in. It was so pitiful. Here was this man, among the most gifted musicians who had ever trod this earth, desperately seeking the validation I had attained on my own. "Where do you want me to take you?" he muttered, trying to be, but failing to stand up again. "I'll get myself a tuxedo and get cleaned up, sis. Let's get out of here." Even now, decades after that day, envisioning Miles down on that floor fills my eyes with tears. It was wrenching to see him stoop so low, heartbreaking to witness the depth of his brokenness. Millions had hailed him as a living legend, and still, this genius of a man, this master of sound, believed his presence in this life was inconsequential. He had no idea what he meant to the world, because he meant so little to himself. I had a hell of a time getting him on his feet and back to the door. I called the front desk and asked the bellman to be sent up to help him to a taxi. As I put my hand on the knob to let him out, Miles toppled back to his knees. "Sis, let's get married," he slurred. "I want you with me." I shook my head slowly from side to side and turned the knob. And y'all, that is chapter 14. So as we can see, Miles, he left for about a year. He married the lady that we read about, I believe, in maybe 2 chapters ago. It might have been 1 chapter ago. But as we can see, that marriage didn't last long. And then he winds up kind of coming back into Cicely's life. I find it really true that once you love someone, you truly have love in your heart for that person. I don't think it ever goes away. You may not feel the same way affectionately, but that love that you gain for that person, I feel like it is always there. And I really am seeing that now in some of this, where she has really dealt with Miles Davis in a lot of different situations, some really hard situations, but her love for him seems to win out. So thank you guys so much. Please remember to comment down in the comment section any of your thoughts or any memories that you may have. I would love to hear them. And if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please go ahead and subscribe. This is my story time with Lynn, but I also do Dollar Tree hauls, reviews, DIYs, little cook with me's. Y'all, I do some things. That's why I am Lynn N Things here. Thank you so much, and don't forget to hit that like. That really does help the channel. Talk to you guys in the next video.